Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's the day for Manuel Gutierrez to give an artist talk. And as always, I would like to introduce our and recognize our board members present. Ms. Carol Plum, Ms. Glenda Martinez, Dr. Ruth Guy. So thank you very much for being here today. Supporting arts and museum and education activities. Also, we have more artists for the community, Alan Wallinger and Dr. Moret Organ. So thank you very much. And what about the family? Thank you for supporting your dad.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Sorry?
Forgot Mrs. Hall.
Oh, no. And Miss Mona, thank you for being here as well. Supporting the art and the person as well, like always. So it's your time.
Okay.
I'm just gonna sit down and be available. Thank
All right.
you again for supporting the museum, for being here and give us and express your artwork in words and during your artist talk. It's very interesting for us and it's a great opportunity for the museum to connect with the community. So
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, so I'm not going to give a lecture. The point is that it's a Q&A, so I'll just sort of introduce myself a little bit and introduce my work, and then we can do a little demo. I actually brought some of the materials that I use and brought some of the embroidery thread so you can actually try it yourself. My son Sam here is going to help distribute that, and my son Milo is going to be the videographer of the
Very good.
talk here. So a little bit about, did all of you get a chance to read my artist statement? If you haven't, it's right there if you want to read it. I'll focus on these 5 large paintings, which I started in 2019. It was the end of 2019 that I started making the work, and it was just a couple months ago that I completed these 5 pieces. And these 5 pieces are part of an ongoing series of work, which I, to be completely honest, have not decided when I want to stop making them. I kind of want to keep making them indefinitely. So I know that I have 13 envisioned very clearly, and I have the images for them, but I kind of feel like I could keep going. So I'm not setting an end date to these. Each one of these takes between 4 and 6 months to make. They're all hand-drawn, hand-painted, and hand-embroidered. And I take these pieces of tearaway stabilizer, which I did some little drawings on here. I'll explain that later. You guys can try it out. I take these little pieces in large swaths, and I hand sew them together, and then I put the images up, draw them out, paint them out, and then I hand embroider them. So it's a multi-month process to get the whole thing completed. So why do I do it that way, and what are they about? I'll start things out that way, and then if you have questions, just hold on to them, and then you can bombard me. I sew these pieces together. It wasn't an accident. I actually wanted to sort of replicate the concept of violence in our culture. And so the traditional sort of painting method would be to get a canvas, to stretch it on wood, and I wanted to sort of rip it off the stretcher. And I wanted that act of violence to be very present in the work. So when you come in, you're immediately confronted with, that's not a normal shape. You know, it's not nice and pristine and square and everything feels okay. I wanted that feeling of not okayness to be very present in the physical work itself. So I started to sew these pieces together with red, and the red was very much to me symbolic of blood and suturing a scar. So I wanted the material to almost be like flesh. And I'm going to talk in these sort of abstract terms. It doesn't all make sense. I think that's how art is. It doesn't always all make sense. But I wanted it to be like torn flesh, like the skin of a body. And I wanted all the mistakes to be present in it. So some of them are torn, some of them have little pieces falling off. I wanted all of that sort of history to be present in the work, kind of like a human body. So we go through life, we age, we have warts, we have scars, we have back issues, all the things that happen to a human body. I kind of wanted these pieces to show that. So that's the start. So that's the structure, and that's why they're on that structure very specifically. And if you have questions, I have tons of things to talk about in terms of influences and how I got to this work and other artists who influenced these decisions. So then the next big piece is why these images? And then the last piece would be why embroidery, obviously. So I'll go ahead and answer that. These images are very specific. So in each painting, you have one image of either a person or a group of people who are coming to the U.S. across the U.S.-Mexico border. And in the other set of images, you have people in the aftermath of a mass shooting in the United States. So very different images. And the way I started to see things in our culture was, so my family came from Latin America, so there's his personal history there with what that experience is like. And then I have children, and they're going to school in the U.S., and there are mass shootings in schools. So these were very personal sort of experiences in my own life, and I started to see these similar body gestures in these two types of incidents. So you have a boy holding a picture of his sister who died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, and you have a father holding a picture of his daughter who was murdered, killed in Parkland, Florida, shooting. You have a couple, she's hugging her husband with her child on her back because her sister has died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, and you have three women huddling after a mass shooting in Santa Clara. And so you can go through each one of these, and their body gestures are very similar. And it's just plain old pain. There's nothing deep, there's nothing beyond that. There's no big intellectual apparatus here. It's just pain, pure, raw pain. And that's what I wanted to express. So I won't go through what each of these places are, but you can see, running, woman reaching around, grabbing, holding on, two children lost, scared, confused, couple of people embracing, holding pictures. So those are the similarities. So the idea here is, without going too far, I'll sit here and talk for 24 hours, so I'm going to try and edit myself a little bit. The idea here is that by seeing these sets of images that are constantly going through our phone, this is sort of really what my work is about when we get right down to it, is these images are flying through our phones. We have mass shootings all the time. We're seeing images of this unbelievable humanitarian crisis at the border all the time. And it becomes a political discussion. Way up here, abstract, not in here. And part of the reason for that is because of the expediency of it all. And so I wanted to just say, wait a minute, let's slow this all down. We're not feeling things as a culture. How can we wake up in the morning and allow our children to go to school where they're committing mass murders? How do we wake up to that reality? I don't know how to wake up to that reality and make it okay. How do we wake up to the reality that there's a humanitarian crisis at our border that largely our political apparatus created? How do we wake up to that every day and not solve it? And I thought part of the problem here is that these images and these political stories are flying in front of our face so quickly, so constantly, that we're not being slowed down enough to actually go, that's extremely painful. So my process as an artist was to take 6 months to make one of these sets of images to hopefully ground us in the feeling of going, this is not okay. This is real pain. This is real suffering. There's something wrong with our culture. There's an underlying ethos of violence that we have to take a look at as a society. So that's the whole political story behind my work right there. Why embroidery? And I'm sort of just answering probably some questions that will come up, but I sort of want to get the big ones out of the way, and then you guys can go into all details that you want. Embroidery, I have to be 1,000% honest, came to me in a dream. I was traveling with my family, and I had this dream of embroidery thread going through canvas, and the embroidery thread had been dipped in paint, and it was splattering on the canvas. That's all I remember. And then I had this idea of getting hip-hop lyrics, because I thought hip-hop lyrics, really express the pain of our culture in such an interesting way. And then I thought, I'm not African American. It's not appropriate for me to do that. I don't feel it's my place to do that. So I just let it sit. And then I was walking down the street in New York, in Brooklyn, where we were living at the time, and I thought I'll get some embroidery thread. My wife was kind of kicking me like, you need to make some work. Like, you're driving me crazy. Like, you're not working as an artist. Like, get to work. And so I didn't have a studio at that time. We just couldn't afford it. It was New York. So I just got some small variable stabilizer, brought it home, and started making the drawings, and all the things that were bothering me, I started to draw. And then I thought, embroidery thread is the perfect symbol for flesh, for human flesh, because it's the one thing in here that is not part of the background. It is the living piece. And it is all of those threads of history, of pain, that get transferred culturally down through the generations. So it's like the thread of violence, the thread of pain is the concept. And that just led to this work. And so here we are today with these. So yeah, so that's that is everything about this series of 5 paintings. And I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say about them, but I'm here to answer your questions if anybody has questions. And if you don't, if you want to wait a minute, sort of let that kind of simmer for a second, we can start doing a demo if you'd like to do that, and I can sort of show you the materials that I work with. But if you have any questions right off the bat, please, anybody.
Who are your influences?
Yeah, sure. So Leon Golub was a huge influence of mine. If you're not familiar with Leon Golub, he was a painter who passed away, I think about a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken. And he was a 1970s and onward artist in New York. I almost had the chance of meeting him, but it didn't work out. I was really hoping. He was really my first big personal adult artistic influence. And he would take big chunks of linen canvas, 20 feet long, all the way up almost to the ceiling, and put them on the ground and cover them in acrylic paint, and then draw images of mercenaries in Central America and Vietnam, and these violent acts that these men who were being paid to do on behalf of the American government, these sort of terrible, secret, funded, horrible men that would have to go behind the scenes and do these terrible things. And so he created these images, and he would put them on the ground, paint them, and then he would carve out the images with a meat cleaver, very violent, and then he would smush them together and rip them apart, and then he would literally just tear out pieces of the canvas. And I remember the first time I saw one of his works, it was just absolutely like someone just smacked me across the face, because the work itself was an act of violence, and I remember feeling that, and I thought, I never thought that you could really, I'm not a sculptor, but a sculptor would probably laugh at me right now and go, duh. But, I never realized that you could do something political, emotional, with the materiality itself. And so he was just a huge influence on me, and his work was a huge influence. And he was very much shunned by the New York art world. He was never fully accepted. I don't think he got a formal, big, important sort of show until he was in his late 60s. And I've had that experience. I just history of me. I lived in LA, New York, exhibiting my work, and I've had many, many studio visits with people who have liked my work. It's very difficult to sell, Mateo. It's very sad. It's very political. It's hard. It's big work. So there's a lot of that in the art world that makes it difficult. And I know he went through that. So he's always been an important hero of mine. Another very important artist who influenced me was the great Kerry James Marshall. So, African-American artist who makes unbelievably beautiful work about what it means to be black in the United States and just be a person and not be black, yet it's about black people. And he also paints large canvases that are not framed. They're with grommets like I do. They're very beautiful, very poetic. I like his old work. I'm not as much of a fan of his new work. So those were two very big influences. Probably
his work, some of it is almost black on black, but you can hardly see what it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Great stuff. And I think he's, influenced so many generations of people in such an important way. And he's such a brilliant speaker too. He's someone I really love to listen to as an artist, because he brings so much dignity to art, and he's very serious about it, and he's very thoughtful, and very, very intelligent person. Someone I really admire a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We also, one thing, I think on your website, you're working on a piece that's going to take you another 9 to 10 days to start scanning.
Yeah.
Have you started that yet?
I have not. So that's Americans of the Decadence, which is I'm remaking a painting that is in Paris right now. I've been there, I've seen it. It's called Romans of the Decadence. It's a giant painting, and okay, someone cut me off because I will go for 45 minutes here, but I'll make it up like 2 minutes. So the 2-minute lecture is, this painting stunned me the first time I saw it. These two, my children here, have both seen it as well in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and it's an incredible painting. So this artist made this painting in right during the French Revolution, And he took Romans, at the time of, the Roman era, and painted all these people in this state of utter decadence, like half nude, drunk, falling over. It's like 34 people, and you're just like, oh God, what's happening here? And so he was making a statement about French culture, like, we're just a decadent culture, we're just falling apart, But he did it in a very painterly and art history way of saying, but not us, the Romans, right? But of course he was saying us. So I want to make that same painting in Texas, in particular, in the United States, called Americans of the Decadence, and I want to show our own decadence. And I'm struggling with what those images exactly will be. It's not going to be people falling over drunk, because that's just kind of obvious. So is it going to be people on their cell phones, people shopping, people, I don't know what it'll be, people at McDonald's, will it be rich people? Are they the ones who are decadent? There's a lot to think through here, so I've given myself quite a bit of time to work on that piece, and obviously I need the space to do it. So that's coming up.
Good luck with that.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Don't ask me anything, but throw in our Congress. Don't ask me, I can't even elaborate.
Oh, yes, absolutely, right. Throw in our Congress and lobbyists and, so we'll see what that one is.
I don't know, I think there should be a companion piece of the self-righteous.
Yes,
as
okay.
well.
Okay. Fair enough.
They're just doing everything under the table then.
Yep, I hear you.
How do you know when to stop? And that's just one question I ask almost every artist, because I don't know, like, with my pieces, I can take them off the wall, and then I can go with it until I don't know. Like,
Yeah, no, it's
by somebody,
Yeah, I would say this. So for the drawing and painting component, no. Like if you gave me markers right now and pens, I could go in here and keep going until I've probably destroyed it. So I just get to a point where I feel like I can't go any further. If you get up real close to these, this one in particular, and this one next to his head, I just spent hours just in there, just like to the point of insanity. That really has an absolute endpoint because you just fill up the space and you can't embroider over embroidery thread. It starts to it'll actually start to tear apart and you'll destroy it. So once the embroidery is done, it's done, right? And then I go, everybody has squiggles above their head. I don't know if you see that. Yeah. So there's that's like steam or emotions or I don't know what it is, but it's there. I just have to do it on every single one. And so that's the very last piece. And then I force myself to walk away at that point. I literally have to say, you have to stop messing with this at this point. And then I stop. But it's a great question. It's almost like never. Yeah.
And you work on one at a time, or you have multiple projects that you just jump around?
I have, Sam, you've been in my studio a lot with me. I think I haven't once worked at two at a time, right? Once, yeah. Mostly I like to focus on one at a time. But I have done two at a time once.
So I can change the mood, so this is really intense, and then hearing your explanation is that much more. So what do you do to balance the intensity? Like in your own life, and please, like, you're probably going to point to these two. But what do you do to balance it? Because it is so intense. Yeah,
I think that's a tough question. I get asked that question every now and then, and it's sort of one of those ones that I think I probably don't think about enough, to be totally honest with you. I probably should think about that more in terms of self-care. I have an amazing wife who really is all about self-care and wellness and mental wellness, so she really does balance me a lot. But the truth of the matter is I would say I feel this every day. So to me, I feel like living in the American culture today because of the potential of American culture. Not as sometimes people think I'm deeply critical. I'm critical only in the sense that I have a lot of hope. But I feel like living in our culture is a daily state of denial. You have to always sort of go, oh, well, it's okay, it's not really happening. It is happening. It is happening, and it's not okay that children are gunning themselves down in schools. And I will say it in front of my two children because they have to live with it, they see it. There are blood stations in schools, for God's sake. These are stations where children can go and figure out how to apply bandages to other children now. I mean, this is the state of the country we're living in. And so I feel that every single day. So in many ways, these are more therapeutic than problematic for me. So when I work through that and I get to get them out, it makes me feel like I'm actually doing something. I'm here today talking. That feels really good. It feels relieving to me to be able to stand here and go, let's talk about this. You don't have to agree with me. You really don't, and that's okay. And often people don't agree with me. That's okay though. We have to disagree with each other. But this is a therapeutic process in itself. So I guess that's sort of my little bit of a circular answer. Is it just doing the work, having it in the world, actually helps more than hurts. For me.
You're doing something.
Yeah, I feel like I'm doing something about it. And I always remind myself, like, what I'm doing or experiencing is nothing as hard as the subjects are going through in my work. You know, what they're going through is 1,000 times harder. You know, I always remind myself, I'm not, you know, a poor barefoot Honduran woman trying to walk across the border right now. So whatever I'm going through, this isn't so bad. It's the least I can do.
It's a really good exhibit. I keep thinking in my mind, like, how do you show it to more and more and more people? Just because it's a great exhibit, and I know I've said that word intense before, but it's such a great teaching
Thank you.
tool.
Yeah.
Just all around, and I hope we can get it out to that many more people.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
I have a question.
Yep.
So I teach, and a lot of my students have a hard time, when they think of dark themes, they just think of a dark or limited color palette, and they don't go out of their way to explore or experiment. And here I noticed your pieces, there's kind of, you're using your own method of pointillism, but even when we step away from the pieces, they're still very colorful.
Yeah.
So, but noticing you have pieces that are limited in color palette on those walls.
Yep.
And then on the side, it's much more chaotic, and it's feeling that method of violence that you want to showcase. So in essence, my question is, when you see color, how do you use it, or what does it mean to you in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So color is extremely important to me, and I like extreme abundance in color, as you can tell. I like a lot of color in my work. The reason for that is because, to me, color is emotion. Like, to me, it's just pure one-for-one symbolism of diversity and complexity of emotion. So I feel like one of the things that humans do so well, sadly, is deny our emotions. We pretend like we're non-emotional creatures when I believe essentially we're 100% emotional. First and foremost, that's like the core foundation of who we are. And so I want my work to portray that colorfulness rather than diminish it down. So for example, when I think of the word documenting or documentary, I think black and white. Or I think very controlled color schemes, very monochromatic or closer to monochromatic. And I think that, with all due respect to documentarians, I love documentarians, and I watch documentaries, and I love documentary photography. But I don't want to go down that path because in some ways, for me, you know, I've grown up with those images. There's a certain distancing that happens. Oh, that's a documentary photograph. Oh, that's a documentary film. You know, oh, that's what that is. It fits in that box over there. So the color for me is a way of like slapping us. Like, no, I want that emotion right on the surface. I want us to feel it. And so that's why I work with color in the way that I do. Extreme amounts of color. I mean, there's every color in the rainbow in here, like, and mixed in layers, and like, you know, orange next to green and purple and blue and everything. And I don't, just so you know, I'm a completely free-form maker. The level of calculation here begins and ends with getting the actual image structure on, so the actual outline of the person. And then from there, it's 1,000%, 100% freeform. I don't know what's going to happen. And I like that. And I like that with the color, too. I feel like that's coming from a place in me that, you know, as they say, if there's a tear in me, hopefully there's a tear in you, right? So if I'm not feeling it, I can't expect my audience to feel it. So that's probably a very long, convoluted answer to that question, but that is the answer. But these, so we haven't talked about these. So these are different, to your point. They're much more subdued, and they are actual photographs printed on canvas. And these are really meant almost as like appetizers to the main course, right? So the idea here is, those are hand embroidered, the yellow parts are hand embroidered. And so the idea here is really sort of a little bit of a conceptual play, which I don't usually do. But if you look at, these are all the skin is embroidered. So now the last remnant of the act of violence, this bullet, marker, is embroidered like the skin. So it's sort of a sad homage to what horrible event must have happened here. So again, way more than just the color question, but
That was quite the appetite.
yeah, right, yeah, yum. So, any other questions from anybody? Yeah. How do I know how to what? How do I know how to do that? I don't know. That's a good question. I think, I've been making work for a long time. And I mean, that's kind of the great mystery of being an artist is, I don't know if you're an artist, but you are. Okay, so then you know what it's like. It's like, I went to graduate school in art, and people say, well, what's it like to get a degree in art? Like, wow, that must be fun, And, it's just like playtime, right? And it's not. It's like it's four walls. What I always say is it's four empty walls. And, the professors will come to you and go, do what you want, right? That's the hardest proposition in the world, because you're standing in these empty four walls going, what do I do? So that's the question you're asking, is how do you cross? So my answer is years and years of I made probably a dumpster or more worth of work in graduate school that went into a dumpster. Just churning through ideas, trying everything. I had a professor walk in my studio once and say, oh, there's this artist and that 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 artist. Where are you? And and he was right. I wasn't making my own work. So I think it's looking inside. I try and figure out, okay, I'll tell you the answer, because sometimes I'm not sure what the answer is here. So the best piece of advice I ever got from an artist was, what do you think about all the time? So this is what I think about all the time. This is just what I think about, what bothers me and what worries me all the time. I'm always thinking about these things. I wake up thinking about them, I go to bed thinking about them, I have children, I live in this country, I'm concerned. So then I started making work about that. And then, how do I get from there into actually what this object is going to be? That's the mystery of it all, I guess. Yeah. It's a good question. It's a hard question. It's a really hard question. Any other questions? Anybody, anything you want. Okay, I did bring some material because everybody, I've heard that maybe you want to try or you want to see what the material's like. If you want to try embroidering, I can show you how to embroider in 2 seconds. Anybody want to try that, or thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay. So this is tearaway stabilizer. I only brought a few of them, and I put some, actually Sam helped me and Milo helped me, put some basic shapes on them. And I'll just pass them out. You guys can see what they feel like. Okay.
When you say tearaway stabilizer,
Yeah.
what is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so tearaway stabilizer is when you embroider on, any type of front-facing fabric, a jacket, a piece of clothing, an artwork, a final, like maybe a smaller artwork or whatever. The tearaway stabilizer is what goes behind it. And it's literally tear away. So you embroider, and then this stuff on the back gets torn away, and it creates a support so that it's a strong bond. Because otherwise, if the material is really thin, it's just that embroidery thread is not going to bond with it. It's going to tear the material up, or it's going to go through. So the tearaway stabilizer is the backing. So the reason I use it is because I want to tell the story behind the story. It's a conceptual apparatus, which I don't usually talk about. And then I've fallen in love with it, and for some reason it's just become the thing that I use.
Now, is this sold in like bolts, like fabric?
Yeah, it is literally sold in bolts.
I thought it was pellet, like was used in
Yeah.
clothing for stiffening
I see.
lapels and
It's
other.
like it. It's very much like it.
But it's not the same thing?
No.
Okay.
So you have this material behind
No, it is actually made of that.
the entire
The
painting?
entire thing is made of that.
You paint on this?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
And
so-
it is archival, interestingly.
So that's not canvas that you're painting,
Wow.
that's not canvas you're painting on
No.
that you're embroidering in. This
It's
material
literally what you're holding in your hands.
is what these paintings are.
That is correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can
And
paint
it's
directly
archival.
without gesso or anything?
Correct. And I learned very early on that that will bond to the wall.
What gesso will go through it?
Yeah, and paint. So when I'm painting these, in the beginning stages, I'm always pulling them off and putting pins behind them so they dry. Because the first time I went crazy and then it was like this is not coming off the wall.
Is that oil or acrylic?
It's acrylic,
So it dries relatively quickly.
relatively
so
quickly,
You don't
yeah.
have to keep it away from the wall.
Exactly, it's not months of or weeks or whatever. Well, yeah, exactly. But- Okay, so I'll show you guys how to embroider. Do you want me to do a demo?
Yeah.
Okay. So step one is, obviously you have, I'll get closer so you can see me. You have your sewing needle, which it's a larger size needle, right? And then you have, your thread. I always double it up. I shouldn't reveal all my tricks, right? But I always use 2 different colors. Yeah, this one I didn't. And then, you just thread it through. And if you're like me, half blind, you have to have glasses. Okay, so you thread it through, right? You've tied it off at the end here, just to like 4 or 5. The end there. Okay? And then you get your, can I have a stay away from somebody? All right. Okay, so here you have, like a basic shape. So you come through the back. So here, I'll show you and then I'll explain something. So you come through and it holds. And just to give you an idea, three. That's 3, right? So go look at how many are on there. Like, it's just so much of that.
4 to 6 months.
Yeah. So what I do is I will literally take these, put them on the wall, roll them up all the way to the point where I'm embroidering, stand there and embroider for hours on end. These guys have seen me. I'll literally do this. So I'm going to be in here behind this guy, just roll it up, and I'm behind here. It's attached to the wall, through and through and through and through, doing all these parts. We'll keep rolling into here, do this, and put this back, and then do this side, and roll it up, and that's the process.
So you've already done the separate sections, it's not like you have pieces that you then put
Correct.
together, you have the
That's
whole
correct.
thing, okay.
That is correct. So this whole structure gets sewn together. The images get drawn, outlined on. Then I draw the whole background, which takes at least a month or 2. And then I draw in all the clothing and the non-body parts. Right? And then the final stage is I roll into here and I start embroidering. And that's like the last few months of work. And that's what takes all the time. And then I'll roll it back out, and then I do those squiggle lines above the heads. And then to your question, I stand here and wonder if it's really done. And then that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
You do such a nice job drawing people. Did you do a lot of figurative work when you were younger in art school?
I didn't. That's a good question. I did not go to undergrad art school, and I got into graduate school. I was doing a lot of abstract work and a lot of non-literal figurative work. And when I got to graduate school, I did a lot more of that. And then I really didn't get into figuration until I got out of graduate school. And I went to graduate school, so I'm not totally self-taught, but largely self-taught.
Yeah, well, the quality of your drawing and rendering really comes through your work.
Thank you.
With the creativity of the threads. I like what you said too, how you use 2 colors in with the needle.
Yeah.
Because when I was looking at it, I'm like, that's just like skin tone. It's not just one color, it's others
Yeah.
mixed together.
Yeah.
It's really great.
And my mother has, sewn her entire life. So she's essentially a seamstress. She's like, like classic, Latino mom who's always fixing everything for everybody, right? She's always sewing people's clothes. She sews everybody's clothes in the entire city she lives in. It's just like, that's what she does. She has a giant sewing room, and she's just always sewing. And she was always embroidering. And so I was always around her. One of the first things I learned how to do as a young person was how to sew a button, And my mom was very closet feminist, sort of like, you're a boy, but you're going to learn how to sew a button, damn it, And so I learned how to sew a button. And so it has to come from there. That has to be one of the sources of why I end up making this work. And it is a big part of my work is, I'm a Latino male. It really flies in the face of machismo to be making things with my hands, to be sewing, to do something that's very, culturally viewed as feminine. And I think that's really important for men to break out of that. And when I look at the violence in our culture, who's causing it? Yeah, exactly. No, really, it is. And so I just go, that has to change, and it has to start with me, and I'm way down the line of probably not being great at that, but I'm trying, and this work is part of that message.
It's amazing that you can get the colors to the embroidery with that material. That's not something you can go into Texas Art and buy. You've got to find those in sewing shops, right?
Yeah, it's pretty standard embroidery cloth, but I mix it up a lot.
Yeah, that combination of the imagery, the violent imagery, and the material that you use, the traditionally feminine material, is it's a contrast. You're making these very sad, strong images with a soft, nurturing,
Exactly.
traditionally feminine thing. I like that combination.
Yeah, thanks. My wife has made some really powerful points about what I'm doing that I haven't even realized. My own sort of attempt to evolve myself, maybe successfully or not so successfully. But yeah, I also want that to be a highly contrasting experience. Why are these violent? Very sad. They're very sad images. People are crying, and these are really sad, tragic moments. And they're obviously not painted in this super sweet way, but they're with embroidery threads. The whole point is to get us to stop. So I could just do a photograph, or I could just, do a hand draw. If they're embroidered, I've never seen anybody, even if they don't like my work, I've never seen anybody come in and not go, And so as long as that's happening, I'm okay. It's I saw a great artist lecture recently, and they said, what do you want people to feel? And the artist was like, anything. And that's my response too, just anything. I just want us to feel things. I don't have a specific agenda for what you should feel, or I should feel. We just need to feel things. So, yeah.
I was surprised when I came to your opening. I actually felt a sense of joy because I could connect to your work in a way that I can't through the television, and I can't through the news. And having your show up right now for the Uvalde, anniversary of the first year, just makes it so powerful. I'm really proud to have this show here at the museum.
Thank you. That's like music to my ears. I hope at the end of the day I bring dignity to our existence.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'll step out for a while. I don't know if someone already asked that, but why title Y Me Siento Bien?
And I feel
How
fine.
is the connection?
Yeah, so it's from an
I feel
REM
fine.
song. It's for the band REM. It's the end of the world as I know it, and I feel fine.
That's what I kept going through my head.
Yeah.
That song after the title.
So I want people to think it's the end of the world as I know it, and I feel fine. We're all just fine. Everything's fine. And it's a play on words, like, it's not fine. I don't want us to feel fine. I want us to feel very unfine about it. So, yeah, it's a good question. I was gonna get asked a lot. Any other questions? Welcome. Hello. Hi. Do you have any questions? No? Okay.
Sorry.
No. Absolutely welcome.
Is your mother alive?
She is. She's 90 years old.
What does she think of your work?
She loves my work. Yeah, she really loves my work. She came to the U.S. from Argentina. She did not speak English. She came when she was 8. And her family's actually originally from Puerto Rico. So she's very connected to the immigrant experience and feeling like an outsider. I actually grew up overseas as well. I didn't come to the U.S. till I was 16, so I'm very connected to that experience. So she loves that part of my work, really connects to it, really understands it. And she's a very political person. She really understands what I'm trying to do, I think. And she sends me embroidery thread. All the embroidery needles that I have are from her.
So actually, it's your mother that we need to credit.
You really do. You do. Yeah, you probably need to credit my mother. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Good one. All right. I think I'm almost done unless anybody has. I can keep talking. If you have more questions, I'm happy to talk, but if there aren't any more questions. That's a good question. I started in painting. I did start in painting. Yeah, really in oil painting, actually. I was in college, and I was majoring in philosophy. And I thought, I'll take an art class, because I've always drawn. I've always liked to draw and make things. And I took an art class, and it was a still life, and it was oil paint, and I just loved it. And I went nuts and just like made a mess. And it was a graduate, it was like senior students in the class, and I was an undergrad, but I got in, and the professor was like, "This is amazing, who made this?" And I thought, I've never felt that before, it felt so good. And so then that was it, then I was done. And then it was like, I painted every day in my dorm, like just, that was the moment. But it was all painting. I'm a painter. I love painting from the very beginning. Yeah. Never really worked with embroidery thread until the last 5 years.
So selfishly, I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
Is your mom still in Brooklyn, and is she still sewing? Because our daughter lives there.
No, she is not.
She's a nice person.
No. My family is all from Northern California and Southern California. She grew up in San Leandro. And then when my father passed, she lived, well, actually they both moved to Boise, Idaho, to the mountains, for just the quality of like the air and the space. And she has lived there ever since. And she works in a homeless shelter. She's a really interesting person. She's always been a very important influence for me. And but she's not in Brooklyn. She's still alive, very much alive. She's like full of energy. Yep.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Have you thought about maybe trying like different textures of the like knots and stuff that you can do with embroidery? Like little French knots and a little, I don't know. Just like, I mean, I looked into it. I've never really gotten into it. But.
I haven't. I've flirted with some ideas. I saw this interesting thing on Instagram. This woman who was like making embroidery, going through and then leaving a bunch of the thread out. And she kept doing that, like, until there was just like this much, and then she cut it. It was really interesting. I've thought about that. I sort of want to see where this goes, and I like to let these things kind of evolve. I'm sure I'm going to make a mistake. Well, mistakes are the best things, right? So I'm going to do something. Yeah, and then it's going to be like, oh, wow, I'll try that. But I haven't really intentionally thought of new pathways for embroidery just yet. You have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so you studied philosophy for your undergrad?
Yeah. Yes, I did. And I was going to go, I wanted to be a professor, get a PhD in philosophy, but it was just not. I was like, I like to make art. That's what I do. So
do you think it influences your art, of course, right?
Yeah, it does. Philosophy, I think the reason I stopped with philosophy is because it's so intellectual and so abstract and so like, up in this tower. And I'm like really over here in the world going, what's going on? Like, I love this, but it felt so divorced from reality. So I would say it has helped me see bigger pictures, but I'm not a philosophical artist. I'm not a rigorous intellectual. I'm not a conceptual artist. I don't like conceptual art, I'll be really honest. I have nothing against it. God bless people who like to make it. I'm not a conceptual art. I don't enjoy going into a room and trying to decipher a code. I want to really feel things. So my philosophy and art are very separate for me, and I haven't studied philosophy at all in years since. But I loved it. It was a great gift of learning how to think. You know, it's like exercise or something.
Yeah, conceptual art just gets you thinking in another way.
Yeah,
What it
yeah.
is, you know.
And God bless conceptual artists. I mean, I remember studying the history of conceptual art in Latin America, which is fascinating because in Latin America, people were using, in parallel to European conceptual art, at the same time. You know, we don't often realize that, like, oh, you know, everything happened in Europe. Actually, it didn't. In Latin America, people were making conceptual art, and they were doing it because they couldn't make political art because they'd be persecuted for it. So they would make conceptual art. And this would allow, you know, women, people who were LGBTQI, people who just had different political views, to make stuff and make a political statement without the risk of being persecuted, you know. So I respect it. But, you know, it's like 50 years now of walking into galleries and like, you know, there's a chair and a pair of scissors and an underwear, and it's like, I'm just tired of it. Like, I really am. I've been looking at art for so long. It's like, it doesn't, like, in my view as an artist, I will say we need more right now. We need to start feeling things, and that's not helping me in that agenda. And in the United States, you can say things. So say things, is my view. And again, nobody has to agree with me. It's okay.
In the early days, it was interesting, that early, like Yoko Ono stuff, way back in the, early 70s, and things you'd see in New York, were really like, whoa, you know, where's this coming from? And then, after 50 years of it, tedious, I can see that.
Exactly. And it is powerful stuff. I remember, you know, James Turrell, the light artist who makes, you know, beautiful light sculptures out of light. So, you know, you walk in a room and there's just like blue light, and you're trying to figure out what it is, and then you can put your hand through it. And I remember he visited where I was going to grad school, which was at UT, is where I went to grad school. And he visited, and he was asked very poignantly, like, do you consider your work political? And if so, you know, why? Because he had made a statement that he felt he was political. And it was sort of like, you're not political, you can't be political. And I remember it was a beautiful statement. He said, I'm subverting your senses. I'm making you not think that something is, I'm helping you see that what you think is real is not real. And he's like, that subverts your senses. So that's subversive, and it's inherently political because it makes you realize that what you see may not be real. And I thought, that's very smart. That's very powerful. He's right.
Yeah.
So I don't look down on conceptual artists. I'm not trying to, you know, say that it's bad, but it's just not where I live as an artist at all. All right. How long have I gone? How am I doing here? I've did a full hour. Any more questions? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, my helpers. Thank you to the museum and all the directors for giving me the show. I really appreciate it. It's been an incredible experience. All right. All right.